Hi, everyone. Here we are back again for another exciting installation of Barack reading from his newly released book, 5. And this will be Act 2, double feature, chapters 8 and 9, Dreams and Things, and Stairway to Heaven. Barack.
Thanks, Rich. So, a little bit of what on earth is happening outside? All right. We are being hosted by Idan and Shireen again. Thank you for providing us the physical space today. Where we are in the book, where we left our heroes last, was after Aiden shot the stormtrooper, and Garrett sort of escaped, and they are basically running away from the police in the modern context, who are going to be searching for them. If you recall, they got to Stonebridge, they got to see it, we all learned about the stone storms and their particular ferociousness, and got to see everything through their eyes. And so this is where we are. One thing I want to bring up before we jump into today's chapters is way a while ago, if you've been following us, we talked a little bit about the idea that there's two things in this book. One is that it's fantasy until it isn't. The first inkling that it might not be comes shortly. And so I'm kind of giving you a little bit of a heads up on that. The second part of all this is, if you recall, Act 2 is, and also subtitled, When the Heroes Come Together and They Start to Dream. So the chapter heading for this chapter that we're about to go into is Dreams and Things, and we will start encountering those strange dreams that are impacting some of our heroes. So that's a little bit of a intro to the chapter reading itself. So again, Act 2, Chapter 8, Dreams and Things. We better stop here and wait for him. Aiden's voice was strained with exertion. Thank God, Nael said as she plopped down unceremoniously on the ground. It feels like we've been running through the woods forever. Aiden stood bent with his hands on his knees, catching his breath. A moment later, Solace arrived, her long strides making her seem as if she was floating through the dense brush. As she got nearer, her exposed, bloodied shins and bloated ankles told an entirely different story. I think I managed to get scratched by every kind of thorn in existence, she blurted. Yeah, that doesn't look good, Nael said. Looks like you picked up some poison ivy at least. And is that a bite mark? She was pointing at Solace's left ankle. Amongst all the scratches, 2 holes looked distinctly like a bite. Damn. And I for sure thought I managed to avoid it, Solace murmured. Avoid what? The outfit. Her ankle was visibly swollen. She wobbled on her feet. I don't feel so good, she said, before Aiden grabbed her and led her gently down to the ground. Where's Lomek? He asked. He's short, can't move as fast as we do. He told me not to wait. Solace replied. Her ankle was now twice its normal size and turning a shade of green. She winced and groaned in pain. My head, it hurts a lot. And holding her palms up to her face, she muttered in a somewhat bewildered tone, I can't see my hands. Then she closed her eyes and her breathing turned shallow. Alfred poison is bad news, Nael looked at Aidan. She's not going to stay lucid. How are we going to carry her into the city in this condition? I have no idea. Damn, this is going from bad to worse, he replied. And Brad was clear about it. We fuck it up, he'll have nothing to do with us. He sat down and wiped his brow. With them searching for the killer, I don't know how safe it is for us to go through the main entrance. We can get in through the tunnel route to the shallows, but not if we have to carry her along. It's not an easy path. Not to mention that soon enough she will begin to hallucinate, Nael said. Who knows what she might imagine in that cramped tunnel? All we need is for her to trigger one of her shockwaves because she's seeing things. She'll bury us alive. They looked at each other silently for a few moments, then both raised their heads at the sound of someone else arriving. Lomek burst out of the bush, his face red with exertion. Once he saw them, he stopped and caught his breath. Oh, there you are. Hi, guys. What's up? Lomac's hands projected an ethereal aura over Solis's ankle, mixed with faint green streaks that seemed to be getting pulled out of the wound. After a long while, the aura dissipated slowly, and he lifted his hands to reveal that her ankle was no longer green and had shrunk considerably. The vicious, crisscrossing bruises and scrapes on her lower shins were already fading. She'll be back in a minute or two. I do decent work, but nowhere near as good as my dad. When he does this, you're back in business in seconds, he said apologetically. Both Nael and Aidan stared at him with surprise and wonder. Are you kidding me? Aidan blurted. You call this decent work? It's incredible. I guess Brad wasn't lying when he said he just didn't know what you can do. Because let me tell you, buddy, I suddenly feel a heck of a lot safer whatever else we end up dealing with. I never realized anyone could do healing stuff in the field. I always thought it required a church and an altar. I suppose you're right, it usually does, because healers usually follow Frigg, and she works through her shrines. It's a little complicated, but I get my healing powers from Thor, who is more of a field general in a way, right? So I can do stuff like this anywhere, but it's weaker and more limited. Well, I sure as hell prefer having you around than someone who needs to build a fucking shrine every time they need to heal anyone, Aidan said emphatically. Nael nodded. We for sure thought we were screwed. No way we could carry her into the city in her condition. What condition? They heard Solis say. Their heads turned towards her in unison as she sat up. Is everybody all right? They started laughing. After a second, a somewhat confused-looking Solis joined them, and so it was that none of them noticed when Garrett, who wasn't trying to hide at all, finally arrived. At least not until, his hands still tied behind his back, he planted himself right in the middle of the group, and in a pained voice demanded, "What's so funny?" And with that, he brought down the house. You all right, Aidan? Nael tossed the bone she had just finished gnawing on back into the fire and took a swig from her water skin. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's... Aidan's voice trailed off as he stared at the flames. His face was somber. It's what? Aidan didn't respond. Come on, man. We all just watched you murder a bridge guard to save Garrett's life. If you can't trust us, you might as well trust nobody. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. Aidan sighed. I suppose you're right, he said. He took a deep breath. This hidden clearing, the reason I knew it was here. He sighed heavily again, then raised his eyes to look at her. Well, you see, it's where my father died. Nael gasped, her hand rising to cover her mouth. Wait, like right here? Garrett asked. Aidan nodded. Yes, right here. In fact, we were sitting and eating, just like we're doing right now when he attacked, he said. Who attacked? The werewolf. A moment of stunned silence followed. Then Solis spoke. A werewolf? Here? Yes, I watched him. Aidan's eyes suddenly filled with tears. I watched him tear my dad apart. There was nothing I could do. But how did you survive then? My dad told me to run away and hide the moment he saw the wolf, so I did. I was sitting in that tree right there. Aidan was pointing at the edge of the clearing towards a massive oak. Sure, it wasn't a dire wolf or just some other big nasty? Yeah, I'm sure. I hit it with all my arrows. None of them even pricked it. My dad had a silvered sword and he managed to slash it pretty bad, but this wolf was too big. Solis nodded. And the werewolf didn't follow you? He must have smelled you. No, he didn't. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure why. Wow. Lucky that. Aidan nodded. Lomic cleared his throat. So, sorry to be an idiot, but what's a werewolf? Holy Thor, I'm not sure how I feel about that, Lomic said a few minutes later. And you say they become human for 3 days each month? Yeah, right when the moons align, Garrett responded. That's crazy, Lomic shook his head. Yep. Thing is, there have been persistent rumors of them around these parts, but I always thought they were never brave or foolish enough to cross over from Paranta. I remember there was a story one time at dinner at some random dude in the shallows being eaten by one. Supposedly, him dying made it hard for the Steadfast Inn to get certain kinds of special meat for a while. I was just a kid. Anyways, so my dad said there's no way for the werewolves to make it through. Garrett stopped mid-sentence at the sudden gasps around him. Then the realization dawned on him. Oh shit. He checked himself, looking at Aidan's face, whose cheeks were covered in tears. I'm so sorry. After a moment, Aidan shook his head slowly. No, it's all right. My dad was just some random guy in the shallows for those in the uppers. And we did a lot of hunting for the inn. It was good income, so I suppose that makes sense from their perspective. His voice turned to a barely audible whisper. I just wish he was still here. Nael moved over to Aidan and gave him a hug. He placed his head silently on her shoulder and closed his eyes. A few more moments passed in silence, then Garrett spoke up again, his childlike voice contrasting jarringly with the tense emotions around the campfire. So, not to mess with the mood or anything, but want to see what I found? They all gathered closely around him as he laid down a cloth. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a strange object, which he rested in the middle of the fabric. It was the shape of a perfect hexagon, chunky and flat, about the size of a large grape, and set with a round hole in the middle. Weird, huh? I have no idea what it's for, he said. What's it made of? Lomek asked. Some sort of metal, but I'd never seen this kind of metal ever before in my life. Here, check it out. Garrett handed the object to Lomek, who took it from him gingerly and weighed it in his palm. He brought it up to his nose, smelled it, and then tried to bite it. Tough and heavy, he said. Smells like nothing, but tastes cold. Also, what an odd shape. Why the 6 sides? Yeah, Garrett nodded. Awkward. I certainly felt it rubbing against my hip as I was running away from the guards, I can tell you that, he said as he rubbed the side where he'd kept it. It's definitely not bronze or silver or even iron. For sure, Lomek said as he turned it over. It almost looks like a tiny wheel, but only the center hole is round, which makes no sense. It wouldn't actually roll. He tried to feel with the tip of his fingers through the circular opening in the middle. Did you notice that there were grooves on the inside? I can feel them. Yeah, it's like a series of holes on top of each other. Very weird. Maybe it's for carpentry. I suppose you could use it to guide a big nail through. The edges would make it easy to grab securely with your fingers as you hammer. Even so, with my dad's church constantly being worked on, I've been around construction all my life, but I have to say, I've never seen or felt anything made so perfectly. Even if we could figure out what kind of metal this is, the detail is remarkable. Lomek handed the object back to Garrett, who shook his head. It's okay. You're welcome to carry it now if you like, he said, wincing. I ended up sleeping on it for a few hours, and I think I have a permanent scar now. Could it be some sort of magic? I doubt it, Solly said. I'm not a wizard or anything, but I know that magic can't create entirely new things out of nothing. It has to work with what's around us. Lomek, who had been examining the object more closely, said, Did you see the markings? Huh? What markings? Look, right here. Lomek was pointing at one of the flat sides right above the hole. Garrett leaned in and nodded. I hadn't noticed those. I wonder what they are. Looks very intentional, precise. Perhaps some kind of runes? Maybe it's divine? Do any of you recognize the script? They passed the object around, shaking their heads in turn. So where did you find this exactly? Nael asked as she held it in between her fingers. Oh, right. Well, I got into one of those wagons like we agreed. Boy, they sure make it hard, I can tell you that. And it was like a real tight squeeze in there. I could barely move. Anyway, it was also like totally dark inside because the leather cover blocked the moonlight, so I couldn't see a thing, you know? Nael nodded patiently. Hey, yeah, except I could. Like, as soon as my eyes adjusted, that was when I knew I found something. What do you mean? So there was a light in there, super faint, but in that kind of darkness, even something that faint makes like a torch. I figured it was coming from the center, so, you know, I kind of noodled around the top where there was a little bit of room till I made it past the outer boxes, right? Garrett looked at the others, satisfying himself that he had their attention. So then I see there's about a foot of space around one box, right in the middle of the wagon. It isn't stacked like the rest of them either, just sitting there on its own. And get this, it looks just like a box from the docks. Really? They actually had the box? Brad said it was a fool's errand. Oh, it was. That much was obvious. The box was painted to be like one of the other ones, but it wasn't actually one. And how do you know that? Well, see, it's been a bit of a thing for me to find out about these boxes, Garrett chuckled nervously. I'd gotten close enough to a couple of them before to see that they had certain things in common. That box didn't have none of that. Garrett stopped suddenly and reached out to take the object back. He turned it over in his hand. That's where I'd seen this before, he suddenly exclaimed. Seen what before? The metal. The real boxes have these weird-looking corner braces and the lock fasteners, too. I'd always wondered what they were made of. I thought it was some sort of specially made iron, but I think it's the same material as whatever this is. Huh. Interesting. Okay, go on then, Niall urged Garrett. Right. Well, the thing was, the box was showing off this aura, and it was where the light was coming from. Now, I figured a real box with whatever is inside one of them might do that, but this wasn't a real box, so how could it shine like that? So I went down and inspected it. Dude, he said, turning to Aidan, I wish you were there. It would have been so easy for you to just tell the box to open. Aidan smiled. So anyway, finally I did get it open, but obviously there was nothing in it, just straw. But see, the light moved. Garrett took a breath. Niall raised her eyebrow quizzically. See, when I opened the top to look inside, the light changed. I noticed it immediately, how not to. So I closed it and opened it again, and then I realized that it was the paint that was giving off the light. When I was opening and closing the lid, the light moved with it too. Phosphorus ink? Solis asked. That's what I thought, but here's the thing, the color was all wrong. You know that blast you made back at the inn? It had that strange color? Solis nodded. Yes, of course, I know it well. Kind of yellowish blue. I think of it as the color of magic. Exactly, Garrett said. Did it smell funny? Solis asked. Huh? How the hell should I know? I didn't sniff the box, Garrett laughed. What's magic paint? Why? And who of all things would paint a decoy box with it? Niall murmured. Weird, huh? Very weird. Anyway, before I left, I decided to feel around the box real good just to make sure. And that's when I found this thing tucked away, hidden in a corner. It was kind of stuck in a way that most people wouldn't notice, but I have really small fingers, so I felt it right away. I pried at it for a few moments and it came off in my hand. Then I made my way out. Mistakenly popped open one of the fruit boxes when my pants caught on a corner and I got myself some dessert for my trouble. Oh, and great idea about the monkey, Lormac, Garrett added as he finished the story. Seriously. Lormac nodded. There's more to this than meets the eye, he said, but unless anyone else has anything to say, I'd like to grab some shut-eye. Been a rough day. Interlude. Lormac's dream. Pondering the day's events as he settles down for some much-needed rest, Lormac listens to his heart beating its slow, sure rhythm. A quick prayer to Thor melts into darkness, calming him and providing him with reassurance as he drifts away. Sometimes later, he wakes up, opening his eyes with a start. For a moment, he wonders if he had gone blind because it is pitch dark, but soon Lormac realizes that a faint glow is coming from his left. It is pale, yellowish blue in color, and has an odd humanoid shape to it. As he stares at it, he suddenly realizes that the glow is surrounding Solis. His heart begins to beat faster. Lormac gets up and walks over quietly to inspect her sleeping form. Even surrounded by the glow, she seems to be sleeping peacefully. As he stands there, mesmerized by her features, he suddenly finds himself compelled to touch her. He tries to brush the thought from his mind, to turn and go back to sleep. He can't. The compulsion is too strong. His hand reaches out slowly, involuntarily towards her. His eyes suddenly open wide, her eyes suddenly open wide, staring right into his very soul. And yet she stays frozen as Lormac's hand keeps moving inexorably towards her. He exerts every ounce of willpower he has to stop, but it is not enough. His hand has a mind of its own. She looks at him even more intently as his fingers trembles ever closer to her chest until he touches her breast. Then, in a flash, she disappears. Lormac screams. And then he wakes up. Everything is quiet. It's still the middle of the night. There is no glow anywhere. Get up, quickly. Niall opened her eyes. It was still the dead of night, and Aidan's face was right next to hers, his finger to his lips. Shh. Look, he whispered. She sat up quite quickly and followed his gaze. Lormac's sleeping form was surrounded by a strange aura. It had the yellowish blue color that they now knew meant magic. He's been like this for a little while, Aidan added. I was keeping watch and it suddenly just happened. Should we wake him? She whispered back. I'm not sure. I thought about it, but I'm a little afraid of trying to touch him in this state. What if the aura burns us or something? Remember back at the inn? Niall nodded. They both continued to watch in silence. A few seconds later, the aura started to move. And that is the end of that chapter.
Very synesthesia-esque.
Fair enough. There's plenty of that going on, right? Even Solis asking, right? Did it smell like something, right? Because for her, the experience of magic is that, remember, it's like she smells it very strongly. But Garrett doesn't.
So I spaced out a little bit. Who was he dreaming about again?
So Lomic was his wake, sort of like weird waking dream
Yeah.
thing. Is about
Changing position.
It is about Solace.
it is
Okay.
about Solace.
All right.
So he feels apparently compelled to
Yes.
go around and touch her in inappropriate ways.
Oh no.
Does Solace have any inkling of like this?
Perhaps, we don't know. Right now, we haven't. This is the first time we introduce this. It's
Okay.
the first time we introduce this weird dream. There's a lot of introductions of new things. Just curious about, did you pick up on what potentially might be? Of course, it's the strange object, right?
Magic yellowish blue glow thing, the strange object.
The object that Garrett had found, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
The hexagon.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. No idea.
No,
No
Good.
clue.
because you should have the same confusion that they do, even though it's something you are very familiar with.
Yeah, I don't know what it is yet.
And that is your inkling that the story might not be purely fantasy. So once you figure out what this is, you're like, wait,
Okay.
what is this doing there?
Okay.
Right? I think Dan knows what it is. I'm looking at your face. So
Dan, did you read ahead? Yeah, I got
Um,
comfy here. So
I didn't read ahead, but I'm familiar with portions of this where I think I know where this is going. But
all right, well, I'm gonna wait for the big reveal.
it will take them a little while. But if any of you at some point has the inspiration, say, oh, I know what it is, by all means, please feel free to share.
word it out.
All right, shall we jump to the next one then?
Oh, yes.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
So Act 2, Chapter 9, Stairway to Heaven. Okay, everyone, we want to get there as soon as the tunnel opens. The earlier we go, the easier it is to get to the second overlook without bumping into anyone, Aidan urged the group. Is the tunnel that crowded? Lomic asked. Usually not, but it can be. It's the cheapest, safe-ish way in and out of Lava Town, Aidan said. But it does lead to the shallows, so, you know. Yeah, Lomic grinned. Not exactly the destination of choice, is it? Take it from a mother who knows, he added, an edge creeping into his voice. Aidan and Niall quickly exchanged a glance. Right, Aidan spoke, so we better get a move on. But there's another way in, isn't there? Garrett piped in. Well, sure, but we agreed it wouldn't be safe to use any of the main ways. That's not what I was referring to. Aidan looked at Garrett expectantly. Come on, you know what I mean, the staircase, Garrett added, his voice taking on a slightly shriller tone as he struggled to contain his enthusiasm. Aidan sat back and let out a sigh. That thing is a death trap, he said. Trust me, I've gone up and down it a few times with my dad. I almost fell off it more than once, and so did he. But you made it through every time, didn't you? Like, you're here you are, right? I suppose so, Aidan reluctantly allowed. Excuse me, but what are we talking about? Niall asked. The stairway, Solly said in a quiet voice, took a breath, then added, to heaven. The stairway to heaven? That's a funny name. Yeah, it's basically a rope and wooden staircase that makes for a steep climb around the edge of the gash all the way to the top. If you're careful, you can get in and out of the shallows that way. I used to use it quite a bit when I was training with my magic, which I did a lot in the woods right outside the slopes. It doesn't cost much to make the climb, Solis said. Not many people use it, which suited me just fine. Well, that sounds perfect. So where's the catch? They don't maintain it very well. Very easy to fall off it, or even through it if a step breaks under you, which they do sometimes. Because it's right at the gash, it's very windy, and they rarely replace the anchors. Then, sometimes you get swooped by hawks and eagles if they get too hungry waiting for someone to throw up on the viewing platform. If enough of them come at you at once, you might lose your balance and fall over. I'd seen it happen once, Solis concluded. Garrett nodded. Exactly, and that's why they call it that. It's like, you might die, but at least you'll have a nice view. He chuckled. You can catch it happening from the floor of the council, actually. Some people sit in the audience at government meetings just so they can watch and make bets on whether someone will fall off that day. Of course they do, Lomax said with a frozen smile. He's right, though. I've been to the bottom before. It's at the very edge of the little beach that comes out of the caves leading through the inner shallows to the ocean. It has a small booth and a guard posted. They always seemed so sad and bored, but they never talked to me no matter how hard I tried. I think it's a kind of punishment to be posted on duty there. Still, it sounds like it's the least conspicuous way to get in and out of town. What do you think, Aiden? Aiden sighed. Yeah, I suppose so. Okay, let's do that. But everybody, please be very, very careful. It's really easy to die there. Here it is. They stood in a lightly wooded area at the end of the Lavatown Peninsula. In this spot, the volcano rose steeply upwards. The cliff's edge was marked by twisted trees which clung to it at impossible angles, facing outward and over the sheer drop. It was a very long way down to the waters and jutting rocks below, but peering over cautiously, Garrett couldn't even see the bottom. A layer of low-hanging clouds hugged the mountainside midway down. The smell of ripening berries and citrus fruit growing on branches stretching over the ocean wafted into his nose. Aiden pointed towards a stake hammered into the right side, where the cliff's edge met the side of the mountain. The rope tied to it had seen better days. Another rope was tied across from the first one and onto the top of another wooden stake driven into the ground. The gap between them was just wide enough to fit two people if they stood sideways facing each other. Cool, Garrett exclaimed. Nael stared at him, then gulped. That looks terrifying, to be honest, she said nervously. Just follow my lead, Aiden said. I've done this several times when I was younger, and I'm better at talking to the wood now, so the stairs won't fail me. We'll go slowly. Just copy my movements and we'll do fine. Oh, and stick as close to the mountainside as possible at all times. That way the wind won't catch you easily, and you can keep more or less stable. The less you move, the better. Trust me on that. Lead the way, Chief, said Solis. I've done this too, and though I don't have your powers, I'm comfortable with it. And I'm tall enough to grab the top anchors to stop it swaying. Garrett, you stay behind me. You're the lightest by far, so whatever you do will affect us the least. Garrett nodded as Aiden turned towards the gap. He stopped for a moment, looking down, and took a deep breath. Then he seemed to sink below ground as he took the first stair. Nael, who was next, could feel her mouth go dry. Her leg shook involuntarily as she followed, and she ended up placing her foot down more firmly than she intended. The stair wobbled. Watch it, Aiden said behind his back. Nael breathed slowly to calm herself. As she took another step down, she could feel Lomic grab a hold of the rope behind her. The stairs required careful navigation. They were spaced unevenly and rocked with the climber's weight. They were tied to a couple of ropes running beneath them and hung off of two heavier guide ropes that also served as handrails. One of the guide ropes was anchored to the side of the volcano every few feet. The guide rope at the outer edge was in turn anchored to overhanging horizontal stakes spaced evenly above the stairway. Solis had to duck her head slightly every time they moved past one of those stakes, but she also found them convenient to hold on to. The smell of sea salt permeated everything and heightened their senses. They could feel every fiber of the guide ropes, sensed every imperfection of the volcano's smooth outer wall as they brushed against it. As they reached the edge of the gash, before the staircase stayed back on itself, they couldn't help but stop and admire the city from a vantage point some of them had never experienced before. They could see the council chamber extending from the far end of the volcano and over the shelves, and the circular row of offices surrounding on both ends, extending almost out to the stairway. They could see the flocks of birds circling endlessly below the viewing platform and hear their calls as they created a wild musical score that spoke of anticipation and hunger. They could look down and see the busy trade bay and the ships coming up and down the elevator, and at the very bottom, the outer shallows and the docks. It was home. It had been slow going for about a half hour, and they were not even close to midway when Aiden stopped and abruptly raised his hand in warning. What's going on, Aiden? This stair, it's going to break. It clear through if anyone steps on it. Aiden pointed to what looked like a groove in the center of the next step. Hold on, let me talk to it. It's a pretty serious injury, but I can show it how to heal itself. Stay still, please. I don't want to fall off. Pressing himself tightly against the volcano, he stretched his hand down carefully until it made contact. They watched him quietly as he leaned against the mountainside and away from the constant gusts of wind. Garrett, who was growing impatient in the back, spoke up. What's he doing? He's just telling the stair how to mend itself, Solis murmured behind her shoulder. Really? Just like that? Wait, I want to see it happening. No, don't move. But it was too late. Garrett had already started going around Solace, his nimble movements carrying him around her on the outer edge. "It's not a problem, I'm very light," he exclaimed, as his tiny figure seemed to leap and dance on the small, precarious foothold, sending several stairs wobbling. "Garrett, stop!" Nail's voice was urgent as Garrett descended towards her. Several large birds were flying towards the little group, attracted by the noise and rapid movement. "Don't worry about it," he said enthusiastically as he stepped onto the same stair she was standing on. "You won't feel me coming around you. I'll pop over here. Whoops!" The exclamation crossed his lips as an eagle dove straight at him, sideswiping him at speed just as he was about to cross over and around Nael. He lost his footing and grabbed onto the outer rope in an attempt to catch himself. God damn it! Aidan, who was crouched down and positioned precariously, fell forward and onto the stair he was working on. The sudden movement sent violent shudders up and down the staircase. They heard the sound of wood cracking below, then heard it again from above. Oh shit. Solace felt the overhead anchor she had been holding on weaken and break before anyone else heard it give way. It happened quickly. The wood snapped in her hands and she was tossed to the side towards the empty air. Her height working against her, she found herself toppling over the suddenly slack outer guide rope. Solace made a last, flailing attempt to grab onto something, anything, but couldn't reach the stairway. She fell. They all watched in horror as her tumbling figure made its way down along the mountainside before she pierced the low-hanging clouds and disappeared. "You fucking idiot!" Nael was livid. Garrett's face, perhaps for the first time in his life, looked stricken. His eyes were full of tears. "You killed her! You killed Solace!" Nael's cheeks were flushed with anger. "I didn't mean to," he exclaimed. "I just wanted to see Aidan fix the wood. I'm sorry." He sank to his knees in shock. "Oh, you didn't mean to. That's okay then. I'm sure Solace would forgive you since you didn't kill her intentionally." "No, wait, you know what? I just thought of something. She wouldn't be able to forgive you because she'd still be fucking dead." Lormic, who had been quiet as the scene unfolded, spoke up, straining with efforts to control his emotions. "When we get to the bottom, if we can recover her body, let's take it to the church. My dad can't raise the dead, but at least he can make her look okay. For a funeral or something." His voice broke. "Any chance she's still alive?" Garrett pleaded. "No way. It's a very long way to the bottom, and while there is a narrow strip of beach down there, it's likely she fell onto the rocks. We're almost at low tide. These rocks break down ships with little trouble. Best we can hope for is that the tide doesn't wash her body away by the time we get down. We'll never find her dead." "We have another problem," said Aidan. They turned towards him. His face was pale and he was pointing at the stair he had been trying to mend. It was broken, its two halves dangling from the ropes. "When I fell forward, my weight went right through the crack since I was working on it. I managed to grab the ropes so I didn't tumble down like Solace did." "Gods, we almost lost you too?" Nael struggled to maintain her composure. "Can you fix it? I just can't imagine trying to jump it with the stairs swinging like this." "Yeah, but it will take me a little while. Even then, you'll have to be very, very careful as you step on it. It's much harder for the wood to rejoin once it's fully broken. That kind of wound leaves a scar that lasts forever." Everyone took refuge in their thoughts as Aidan worked, and Garrett's quiet sobs were carried away by the wind. A couple of hours later, a despondent group of four made their way down the final stretch of stairway. This last stretch was an actual staircase built into the cliff. Their shoulders were hunched, their moods tragic. They nodded gravely to the lonely god, who eyed them with boredom before pointing at the sign proclaiming, "Welcome to Lava Town. Enjoy your stay. Entry is free. Departure, 20 coppers per person," before he let them through the small gate. Lormic stopped and turned around. "All right, the tide is rising, but we should have time to search. If her body ended up anywhere near the beach, we should be able to find her." "I'm really sorry, guys. I really am," said Garrett. He raised his face, covered in dried-up tears, and looked to look at the group. "She didn't deserve to die just because I was curious." Nael nodded severely. "You're right, she didn't. I have no idea what we're going to do with you, but you need to grow up." She turned to the rest. "All right, let's cut out and look. Then we can head back to the inn. Once we report to Brad, I think I'm done with all this. Money's good, but being alive is better." To herself, she added quietly, "especially as little as I have left of it." "You're certainly right about the last bit." Upon hearing those words, the foreheads turned in surprise. Solace strolled casually up the beach, a wry smile on her face. Her hand was raised to her head, trying in vain to contain her long hair swirling in the wind. It gave her an even wilder look than casual. I lost my hat on the way down to the beach, she added apologetically. Lormic was the first to recover. What? You're alive? How? Turns out that stress brings out the best in me, she responded, and her smile turned into a wide grin. Garrett, who'd been gaping at Solace in stunned silence, suddenly sprang to life. He ran to her and hugged her tightly. Oh, I'm so happy, he exclaimed as he buried his face in her midriff. The look of the young gnome latching onto the wild mage almost twice his height was so ridiculous that the tension dissipated all at once and everybody burst out in laughter, even the jaded guard. Well, you better tell us what happened and how you're still alive, but let's do it at the inn, Aidan said and started walking briskly towards the cave entrance at the other end of the little strip of sand. Don't know about any of you, but I suddenly rediscovered my appetite. The five of them were sitting in the room that Trina gave them when they showed up at the inn, apparently on instructions from Bavin. It had a couple of bunk beds along the walls, and Stinky brought up a table and 5 chairs and set them in the middle. One of the serving wenches had followed him with pitchers of water and ale and platters of bread, cheese, and jerky. The plates were mostly empty by now. Okay, Solace, so tell us how the hell you're still alive, Aidan prompted, then sat back sighing with satisfaction. Right, Solace said, then hesitated for a moment. Remember the story about how I discovered magic in the first place? That kid who tried to beat me up? She took a deep breath. I've been trying ever since to make something like that happen again, but it's never quite worked. I thought you'd figured out a couple of new magics? Yes, I did, like the cold fire dart I told you about, but I did that through actual experimentation and process and notes. I taught it to myself, basically. Once I knew I had magical affinity, I researched whatever I could about it and then inferred a lot with trial and error. I suppose it's how they teach wizards to do it, but, well, you know, she rubbed 2 imaginary coins between her fingers. Sure, the only wizarding school I ever heard of is in Carantha City. Yes, Lormic said. They turned their heads towards him. Alfred talked about it in the caravan. It's apparently impossible to find the school without an explicit invitation, and you don't get one unless they want you to. Nobody ever gets invited unless they are really wealthy, like lords, and they have to pay a fortune even to be tested to see if they can stay. He said very few are accepted, and then nobody hears from them for like a couple of decades before they come back and join the Magic Corps. What's the Magic Corps? Garrett asked. Alfred described it as a sort of special force that serves at the pleasure of the king, but at the same time has the king served them. They are able to do amazing things with magic, he said. They said they were involved in building Stormbridge, but their primary purpose is to protect their own from invaders. The current king apparently keeps them at arm's length. Alfred got a little vague at that point. Lormic leaned back into his chair. Everyone's head spun with wizards and mysterious invaders until Solace spoke again. Cool. Well, I think what I did was probably how the real wizards train, only badly. Thing is, in teaching myself, I didn't have like a list of effects I could learn or anything like that. So I had to come up with everything on my own. Lots of, can I do this? And what happens if I try that? That's how I figured out the magic can't create something out of nothing. I kept trying to do things like conjure a bunch of gold, Solace chuckled. Well, it doesn't work that way. I can reshape things around me, like take the current in the air and make it focus and explode in a certain direction, which becomes a shockwave, that sort of thing. Gotcha. So what happened when you fell? Ah, yes, you probably saw me enter the cloud. I really freaked out because it went all dark and cold and I knew I was about to die. Came right out the bottom, and then from nowhere, I suddenly moved my arms and fingers in a way I'd never tried before, and the air rushing past me sort of reversed course and pushed underneath me instead, creating a compressed air bubble. I was maybe 20 feet above the ground at that point, just came down gently from there. That's so cool. So you can fly now? Garrett couldn't hide his excitement. No, not fly, but now that I know how to do this, I think I can fall from any height pretty much and just float down to the ground. But here's the thing, it was completely instinctive. I wasn't planning it and I had no idea this kind of magic existed. It simply happened, just like the first time with the bully. So it seems like in the right conditions, I'm sort of primed to come up with new effects on the spot. That is a very useful piece of knowledge to have, Niall said. My suggestion is we keep it to ourselves. She turned to look at Garrett. That means you too, especially you. Do you hear? Don't tell Brad about this. It can save all our asses someday, and I don't trust him. Oh, of course not. No way I'm telling him. It's the coolest secret ever, and it's just ours. Cross my heart and hope to die. Afterwards, they examined the mysterious hexagon from the caravan, but could not settle on any conclusions about it, and eventually left it resting at the center of the table, which is why they all missed the moment when it started glowing faintly when they were all asleep. Interlude. Solace dreams. Did I fall asleep? Did I die? Solace is awake, but she isn't sure whether in her head, in the real world, or in the afterlife. Where am I? Not the real world, unless she has somehow awoken in the eye of a storm. Wherever she is, it is absolute bedlam. The wind blows ferociously around her, so gusty that a step in any direction would be suicide. Lights and colors dance madly within the columns of air, making her head spin and her eyes water. She can feel a migraine coming, but she isn't able to shut her eyes. This is crazy. And where are the others? Wait, what did you just see? Was it real? For the briefest of moments, it seemed like the lights and colors took shape, maybe even a few shapes. People? People? Solace has a strange sense that two of them were very important to her, but she has no idea who they were. She shakes her head. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind. Now she notices that there are flashes of magic color inside too, and she yearns to touch them. She starts to reach out her hand and pulls it away from the swirling wind, fearful of what might happen. But these flashes of color keep calling to her, and she reaches out her hand again, her fingers shaking as she tries to push through the maelstrom. For a moment, there's a sense of exhilaration, but then her entire body is ripped apart as she is pulled into the vortex and is consumed by the blinding magical light. It feels like home. Solace woke with a start, her brow covered in cold sweat. After a second, she realized that Lomek was holding her hand, offering her a cup of water with the other. He had a worried look on his face, but his expression made her uncomfortable. She jerked her hand out of his and looked around the room. It was morning. The others were gone. What's going on? She demanded. It seems like you had a terrible nightmare. We all woke up to you moaning and turning, but we couldn't wake you up. I volunteered to stay here to watch you. The rest went down to grab breakfast. Are you okay? Yes, I'm perfectly fine. Now move and let me get ready. We're supposed to go meet Brad, right? Lomek hesitated, then got to leave. Before he closed the door, he shot her one last look of concern, which lasted a fraction too long. Solace could not help but feel that he turned into a look of deep longing. It made her skin crawl. That's that.
I was almost incredibly angry at you. And then I thought, nah, you wouldn't kill someone.
Yeah, fair. I mean,
You.
I'm glad that you felt that way.
It was too. There wasn't enough setup. I was like, no.
She's
Yeah, well, there's the concept of plot armor, right?
Yeah.
You know, and she does have some. But
too casual. It would have been. It would have set up a much more elaborate scene if somebody would have actually died.
well,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
but
I
she
was a little concerned
she does.
that you were going to start killing them off. But
So no, she's alive. It was in fact a very important scene for her, right? It's all about them discovering who they are
right.
and what they can do.
well, right after that, I started thinking, well, he's going to start killing them off, but they're not going to be really out of the picture. They're going to like come back in some phantasmagoric way or something like that. But then she comes walking back up, you know, what are y'all looking at? Okay, whatever.
But then again,
Think
the
to
ending is
do.
the beginning, right? Where they're just in some nebulous place for some particular time. We presume that's them.
Yeah.
So we don't know. They could be killed off.
For now,
Yeah,
she
I
has
don't
plot
think so.
armor, just like every one of them does to some degree.
Yeah.
It might not stay forever, but for now it's there.
Maybe this is lost and we're all already done.
Maybe it is. I'm not telling you.
Definitely keeping us guessing.
What doesn't kill you makes a plot point.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, there's already. I'm gonna say this. They're subtle. There's some clues throughout this entire story that things are not perhaps pure fantasy or where they think they are. Somebody who is because I love reading this to people. Of course, that's my pleasure, right? That's what I enjoy out of all this, really, other than the writing. Somebody else who's been listening to the book picked up on the thing and said, wait, hold on a second. Pope is like that's a modern term from like, what the hell is it doing there? Like, what is the head of the Catholic Church doing? And, right? Okay, yeah, it's weird that it's there, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm a bit curious about the distinction, this dichotomy between what is fantasy and what may not be fantasy, and why they can't coexist. Why can't it be fantasy with,
Sure.
relation to, whatever we don't see that could
Sure.
be happening in this world, right? So I'd still say that falls into the fantasy category. It's just what we are not perceiving, right?
100% true. I agree with you. I think it's an artificial distinction. To me, the best stories are the ones that kind of involve elements of both. But typically in the world, my understanding of world of literature is that once you start involving things like multiple, not even time travel, immediately makes it into sci-fi. If you involved anything that's modern in terms of appearance or technology or whatever it is, it becomes sci-fi.
That's a point of view, right? Because for us, we're taught in the ways of modern science. We see that as like, oh, okay, that's too far. But if you look at the Bible Belt, some of what we believe in regularly is fantasy.
Yep.
They see it as fantasy.
Yep. Both sci-fi.
So or sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's all a lie. The moon landing was fantasy. It's a lie.
Oh, of course.
Right.
We all know this, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we do exist in a world where for some people, that is already the reality or kind of the story. So I like that. I like that
Well,
you could present for us as well.
So yeah. So but yeah, I agree with you. So but that's one clue. There's a couple others that are buried in the story thus far. That if you kind of go back and now you might pick up on now that I've told you that those are all little clues. This little metal thing is a huge one.
Yeah, now we're gonna be walking around all day looking at stuff. Saying, what's it going on?
It's okay. It's 3 more chapters or 4 more chapters, and
Right.
you know what it is. But
What I was stricken by today, and it's really funny to me that it did strike me, is that as we went through this, and I know that it's based on a campaign, and I have expectations around that. They aren't really spellcasters. They have innate abilities that just fount from them. As it seems to manifest by and large. They have these skills and abilities that their abilities, not really spells, except for perhaps the wild mage, but even then it's very self-driven. So we've known this all along. We've been experiencing them doing it, but it now just hit me that it's all sort of manifested magic instead of spell casting, really, in the way it's presented, and that's so unique. We see bits of it sometimes with heroes and stories, but just this whole entourage, this whole world of these heroes is just a little bit different. It's almost like you're making your own rules.
would he do that?
Not too
Doesn't
many
sound like Barack.
years around here that have convinced people that a bug is a feature.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the world. So this is the thing that I've been saying from the beginning, right? And you've been part of this from the beginning, right? Is that I take all the tropes, right? So all the stuff you're familiar with. So it's not really based on the campaign. It's just that the characters are the same names as the ones I'm honoring my players from the last campaign I ran, but the story is very different. But it's similar here. So when you think about this, if you've played D&D, right, you know what Featherfall is, right? It's a spell in D&D. And what Solace just discovered to some degree is a sort of variation of it, but not really. right? We know what an elf is, but then the elf that I speak about is like Ariel pointed out, very different than what we've come to imagine elves to be in Tolkien, right?
And werewolves are different.
My werewolves
Yeah.
are wolves that change into humans for 3 days a month, as opposed to humans that change to wolves on a full moon, right? And those other things that we will discover about were creatures as the story proceeds, because as I promised you, there's nothing I had to tell you in Act 1 that wasn't necessary for the story. So there's a reason there's a werewolf chapter. It's really important to the story, which means that it will come back and again and again and again. And that's true for any part of Act 1, right? I did not waste your time. That's my guarantee, right? So similarly, the way magic works is somewhat familiar. You could take this story and say, I can think about it in D&D terms, right? This is where they're leveling up to some degree, where you can do that, but then it doesn't quite fit. It's a little bit different. There's a nudge. There's a like, oops, this is, you think it looks like this, but actually, it's like 30 degrees to the right. And that's I think the sense you're picking up on. The way magic works in this world is not like the way it works in any other world that's been done before, but it feels familiar, because I think that's the best way to deliver the story, because ultimately I'm trying to deliver an interaction between people. Everything else is a construct. That's just a scaffolding, right?
But everything people do, whenever you experience something, you always come at it from, you try to find a relatability or a common frame of reference. And so when anything you do in life, you start from what you know, and that's what you've experienced. And that's how it colors your view of anything, right? That's why we have all the isms and ists and predispositions and unconscious bias and etc. But the compliment to you here is that I just went through however many chapters, a lot of weeks of reading, and only now did the suspension of disbelief shatter long enough for me to think about it. I was totally sucked in and soaking through the mural you'd painted. So you successfully just pulled me into your world to where I didn't consider all of that for a very long time.
Well, thank you. Although I hate the fact that your suspension of disbelief is suspended. That doesn't make me happy at all.
It's a momentary lapse of reason, perhaps, on my part.
Oh, somebody should make an album called that.
Should. Yeah, I mean, it's not the way they discover themselves is not really different from the way multi-potentialites discover our abilities in this world and in our life, right? Throughout our life.
Stumbling into it sideways.
Yeah, it's exactly running into a situation that it's like, oh, I totally just nailed that. I didn't expect to be able to handle it at all.
Not bad.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you guys are picking up with that. There's a really important reason that all of this stuff is happening the way that it's happening. It's just, again, I don't want to ruin the discovery, because when it comes, I'm hoping that it's going to be a really kind of like, oh shit moment that will reframe the entire story for me from the beginning. I mean, that's my hope. Now, when we finally figure out why things are happening the way they are, you will have that moment of going back and say, oh, this was about, I thought it was something else entirely. That's the hope. Even with all the foreshadowing I'm giving you, and the little hints about the hints, I hope that it's hidden in plain sight well enough that there's no real obvious way to figure out what it is or what's going on. Now, I will say, I just spent several good hours writing 20 pages of notes. I don't know. I mean, it's a large amount of notes about the story, everything that's happening in the background, all the interlocking story arcs and why they're happening, just to test my own, the internal consistency of the story and fix any logic holes and all of that stuff. I just did that last week. It works.
Cool.
The box is full. I cannot add any more complexity to it at this point. Now, you're not there yet, right? That's about 8 or 9 chapters is the point where the box gets full of complexity. And after that, I'm starting to take things out of the box. So this was Act 2, Chapter 9. I think where you start, I call it coloring the strands. Remember the image of putting a tapestry together, and I'm showing you corners of it. What I call coloring the strands between those patches of tapestry is starting to happen. It will go into very high gear in Act 2, Chapter 16, I believe. And that's where you're going to start getting the right. I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. It's going to start, and then it starts coming really quickly. Like it's one revelation after another as the story picks up speed yet again. It moves to yet another gear, right? If we're now in second gear, it's going to go to like third gear at that point, or have you.
Cool. Well, you're letting us in on a lot of the stuff to come without telling us what's to come.
Right. Well, the next chapter is called A Growing List of Charges, right? You can imagine what's going to happen to this group of misfits, right? They just got implicated in a murder. What else can you add to that? Plenty.
Wow, that was a riveting session of ups and downs, literally downs, taking us through a roller coaster for chapters 8 and 9 of 5, Dreams and Things, followed by Stairway to Heaven. Thank you for joining us.